Hello, everyone. What is going on? It is Thursday. Wow, it's flying by this week. Welcome in to GC Live at the Buzzer with your host, yours truly, Jack Veltri. Appreciate you guys tuning in. As always, we've got a lot to talk about in the world of South Carolina men's basketball this week. Gamecocks suffered a 71-60 loss out in Athens on Tuesday. I was there. Have all coverage on GamecockCentral.com. But we're going to talk about it, share some more thoughts from how the game went out there in Georgia, what went wrong for South Carolina in what was their 8th straight loss. And then we're going to be talking about a little bit of the future. Look ahead a little bit to what's next, because obviously the season's not over, but obviously in some regards, you could say it might be, considering South Carolina's 0-8. They've got 10 games left to go in the regular season. You still got the SEC tournament where things can happen, but we're going to talk a little bit of the long-term future with some thoughts from Jeremiah Donati, South Carolina's new athletics director, who was on 107.5 The Game earlier this week with some thoughts on what's been going on with men's basketball. But before we get rolling, I want to talk to you guys about our main sponsor of the show, right above me here, Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. If you're in the market for a home or you need help with your mortgage, but you don't know where to begin, Clint's your guy to call. He's been in the mortgage industry for more than 20 years. He's a lifelong Gamecock fan, and he is a longtime supporter of Gamecock Central and all of our GC Live programs. Like I said before, you will see him if you're watching right now live on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you watch this stream, you'll see his name above me here. Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. All that information, 803-422-6797 is the number to call. The NMLS number for him is 71597, or you can go to clinthammond.com. All right, so Tuesday's game out in Athens was – I thought South Carolina had a chance to win this game, quite honestly. And we do predictions. Our boss, Brian Shoemaker, puts together predictions and all that good info on how to watch the game, all that stuff, predictions included. I had South Carolina winning this game. I thought at some point it's got to click for them. They're not that far off from being a team that can get a few wins here and feel a lot better about this season than where it's at right now. And Georgia was coming into this game losing 4 straight games. I mean, they just lost to Florida by 30 points. And I know Florida is a great team and all. Then again, South Carolina took Florida down to the wire, and it should have actually won that game. Like, it's just – I don't know. So with South Carolina, though, you thought something had to give at some point. Like, you knew, as Lamont Paris put it, from the previous game against Mississippi State, South Carolina's day was coming. And it just wasn't Tuesday. This game was close at the start. I mean, South Carolina fell behind by double digits in the early going, but then crawled back into it to make it an 18-16 game with about 10 minutes left to go in the first half. And then the wheels just kind of fell off. They went nearly 8 minutes without a field goal, which is really impressively bad, honestly, to say the least. If you're South Carolina, it's hard to score if you don't, you don't get points, right? You don't score, it's tough to win. They go 8 minutes without a field goal. Their only points during that little time comes on free throws and all that, and then they get their next bucket with like 2 minutes left to go in the half. But by that point, Georgia already took advantage of it. They're up by 14 at the break, and then it's kind of cruising from there. Carolina got this game back down to single digits with about a minute left to go in the game. They started running a little bit more of the full court press defense, and credit to Georgia because they were able to take advantage of that and get some easy baskets, something South Carolina has struggled to do when they face the press defense. Just go back to that Florida game and watch how abysmal things kind of looked at times. But this game just never really felt close at all. Even when Carolina cut it down to single digits, it just never felt like they were in it, like they were going to make a comeback. And by that point, it was even too little too late. So not sure what to think of this game. They lost again, 71-60. And like I said before, this was a 2-point game at one point. Never had the lead in this game, but was right in it at the midway point in the first half. And then everything just kind of fell apart. Outside the scoring drought, though, the turnovers continue to be a big issue for this team. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this game, but the breaking down the issues of this game, the turnovers have to be mentioned. I mean, 17 of them. That's not good enough to win a basketball game. And when you're consistently having, I think the number is 16 or more turnovers per game since the Auburn game. Auburn was the last time you had under 10 turnovers, which feels like a really low number for this team, even though I think they had 9 in that game. But you've had 16 or more turnovers in each of the last 5 games. And coincidentally enough, you've lost all 5 of those games. So you're turning the ball over too much, and it's just becoming a bit of an issue. And Adam Ritter, what's up, A. Ritter, has a good point here. We need lineup changes. What's the worst that can happen? A player plays a Jimmy Butler and leaves. Oh man, A. Ritter, I always appreciate your sense of humor, my man. So yeah, I can see what you're saying about how South Carolina maybe needs a lineup change, and that's a good point because let's talk about this. So your guard play outside of the turnovers, outside of the lack of scoring, which this kind of goes hand in hand with the lack of scoring. Your guard play has just not been good enough, specifically from your starting guard with Jacoby Wright, Zach Davis, and Morris Ugasuk. You want to guess how many points those 3 guys combined for on Tuesday night? Take a guess. 8 points. Do you want to know how they got those points? Zach Davis, 6 points, 2 of 10 shooting, 1 of 5 from three-point range, in 32 minutes, mind you. Morris Ugasuk, 2 points, 1 of 2 shooting, 2 turnovers in 21 minutes. Not too bad. Oh, for 21 minutes, you'd like a little bit more out of your top 3-point shooter in terms of percentage and all that. And then you got Jacoby Wright, and he has kind of struggled a bit in SEC play. He had the one game against Alabama where he had 20 points, and he started pretty well off the season. But once he kind of got thrusted into the starting role with Jamari Thomas, who we'll get to in a second, going down with the injury for 4 games, Jacoby's had to be, continue to stay in this role, and he just didn't do anything really that productive on Tuesday. 0 points in 27 minutes, 2 turnovers, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 steal. But again, it's the 0 points on 0 of 3 shooting. That's just not going to cut it. He looks very out of sync right now. His shot selection just hasn't been great, I don't think. It doesn't look natural, comfortable, which is kind of crazy to think about considering this is a dude that has been a pretty good player for South Carolina in his 4 years. Like, he's mainly come off the bench, been South Carolina's 6th man. But ever since, I think it was like the second game of the year where he jumped into the starting role, and he's been there ever since. I mean, he's been a regular starter for this team all year long. And when your starting point guard, mind you, has 0 points and little to no production, that is not good. Now, Jamari Thomas coming off the bench, I think, is an interesting dynamic. I think it's something that I don't think is going to last much longer. I think he's going to go back into the starting lineup at some point because you have no flow on offense when he's not out there, it seems. That's the other thing. With these guards that are not scoring in the starting lineup, my big issue is that you'll get set up on offense, try to create a shot with your guards, but you're just unable to do so. It's not necessarily all because the defenses are just killing South Carolina, just taking away every shot opportunity. It's just, even when it looks like they might have a shot opportunity, they just don't take it. They kick it into the inside. Like, take this, for example. There was one play in that game, probably multiple, honestly, but this is the one I remember. It's just kicking it inside to Nick Pringle. Pringle, it's like the shot clock's winding down, and then just gets blocked. And that's kind of the summary of it, is that these guards aren't creating shots. You're relying so much on Colin Murray-Boyles, even Nick Pringle, to go get you buckets. And relying on CMB is not a bad thing, but when he's not Superman out there having a 30-point game or anything, he had a good game on Tuesday for the most part, but it took a little bit to get going for him. I mean, he only had 5 points in the first half and then finished with 18 on the night. But you're relying on him to be the focal point of your offense. He's doing his job, but not getting a ton of opportunities as much as he needs to get. And then you got the guards that just aren't being, a scoring guard like you need. You don't have a Michi Johnson. You don't have a Talon Cooper to kind of bail you out this year. It's kind of the holes are very noticeable right now, and that's a little bit of an issue. But I mean, Jamari did what he needed to do. He had 19 points, 16 of which came in the second half, 6 of 12 shooting, 3 of 5 from deep. But the problem was he led the way in turnovers. 5 turnovers on the night in 30 minutes. I mean, again, when something's going well, another issue arises. And I think that is kind of the summary of this season for South Carolina during this 8-game losing streak, which now, by the way, they're 0-8 to start conference play. You're nearing the midway point. You got Texas A&M, a good Texas A&M team, number 13 in the country, coming into town on Saturday night, 8:30 p.m., SEC Network at Colonial Life Arena. That's going to be a game that obviously South Carolina is not going to have much of a chance in, not going to be favored. Can they go out here and shock a lot of people, get that first win? I think it's got to come at some point. I don't think this team is going to go winless in SEC play. Like, I just don't think, for how many struggles they seem to have, I don't think they are that bad of a team stooping down to that type of level. But again, it's the mistakes. It's not necessarily that they're playing close games and they just get beat by a buzzer beater every single time. It's the fact that they're playing close, but they get in there, they trip over themselves more times than not. And that's where you see the issues arise, where you got the turnovers, the lack of scoring, the defense has probably been the only consistent thing throughout this losing streak. I mean, when you're holding teams to 71, 65, 70, 66, 66 points, I mean, that's 5 games right there where you're keeping teams in check and you're doing it very well. Like, if you're holding teams to that many points per game, you have a good chance to win any given night. Again, it just comes down to your offense coming through, and that just hasn't really been the case consistently so far. But after the game, I mean, you could just tell that Lamont Paris has kind of gotten to the point where, like a lot of fans that watch this team, they not to say he's like just losing his mind or anything, but you could just tell by the sound of his voice, listening to him in press conferences and stuff. This felt a little different. It felt like he hit a breaking point where it's just like, yes, South Carolina is 0-8 in conference play. Yes, they are under 500 right now, 10-11. Yes, they are struggling. But it's the same things that are continuing to bog this team down. It's the turnovers, the lack of efficient scoring. It's everything. I mean, he said it's kind of like solving a Rubik's Cube, which is very true. It's like whack-a-mole too. It's like one thing just arises after you try to fix the issue. It's something new, and it's just a real slew of problems that this team seemingly has, and it's no accident that they are 0-8 right now in conference play. I think they eventually will get that first win. Like I said, I think it's going to come eventually. Now, is it going to come anytime soon? That remains to be seen. A&M on Saturday. Then you get a nice little week break until you go to Lexington next Saturday to face Mark Pope's Kentucky team. Then you get Ole Miss at home. You go to Gainesville. And then it kind of gets a little easier from there. I mean, nothing's really easy in the SEC, let's be honest. But you have a stretch where you play LSU, Texas, Missouri, Arkansas, and then you play Georgia again before closing out the season on the road in Knoxville. And I think at some point you're going to get a win. Now, will you stack a few wins? I'm not sure exactly, but I have a feeling you're due for a win at some point. I think with your defense giving you what they're giving you, I think it's very much possible that the offense comes through one night and you get a win. But I think at the end of the day, I'm not sure how many wins I see this team getting right now. Ken Pom has South Carolina going 3-15 in conference play with a 2.6% chance of going defeated, meaning 0-18 in conference play. And that would be something that, I mean, there's still 10 games to go. A lot can change, but I mean, I think there's a better chance of South Carolina going winless compared to going on a run here and winning, like 7 of your next 10 games. Like I think the odds of this team continuing to trend downwards, it's possible. But I think at the end of the day, you're probably seeing this team. I think Ken Palm's about right. I think you find a way to get 3 wins, maybe more. I think you probably end up beating Arkansas. I think they are just not very good this season. John Calipari, new coach out there, obviously from Kentucky, faces the Wildcats in Lexington on Saturday. But I mean, that's a much later matchup in the season, March 1st, and I think South Carolina could win that game. I think you could beat LSU on the road. We'll see about Missouri. Missouri's much improved this year. You get Texas at home, which I think is an interesting matchup. It's just these next four games: Texas A&M, Kentucky, Ole Miss, Florida. That's your last real tough until you play Tennessee. That's your last real tough stretch of the season here, and I mean it's all ranked teams in a row. I mean, I don't know. We'll see what happens. Again, the SEC is a gauntlet this year. I saw on bracketology that it's like 13 teams are right now projected to make the NCAA tournament. That is insane to think about. It's crazy because the conference was pretty good last year, but it's so much better this year. And it just so happens that South Carolina is just not nearly as good as all these teams, and that's kind of crazy to think about. Like it was a year ago, literally today. I was out in Knoxville this time last year, watching South Carolina or covering South Carolina when they beat number 5 Tennessee in a real classic game. I think that was the best game of the season last year, beating the top 5 Vols. That was a remarkable win for this program. And then they go on to win 26 games. They compete for the SEC regular season title going into the final week of the season. And I mean, it's been a complete 180 this season. It truly has. And it's just kind of crazy to think where things were a year ago versus where they are now. And kind of getting into shifting the conversation a little bit to the future, if you will, a little bit. Jeremiah Donati, South Carolina's new athletics director, was hired not too long ago, taking over for Ray Tanner. Was on 107.5 The Game. Shout out my guys over at 107.5. You can hear me on there every weekday, 9 to 10 a.m. with Tyler Head. We'll talk basketball, football, baseball, NFL, literally just about anything going on in the world of sports. But Jeremiah was on 107.5 with Jay Phillips, Elijah Campbell the other day, and was asked a series of questions, but was asked about men's basketball, Lamont Paris, and some of the problems that this team got going on right now as to what he thinks is leading to the struggles. Here's some of what he had to say about what has been going on this season, and then we'll kind of shift gears into talking a little bit about Lamont Paris and what Jeremiah had to say about that.
Gap, I mean, that's something that he and I really got to talk about. I mean, I think we've got some good players. I think we clearly probably didn't have the depth that we need to compete in and night out. And that's a little evident that we're seeing that in real time. So, it's not the question came up. It's not a matter of, if Lamont's coming back, it's how can we better support him? And so when the season's over, I actually have a meeting with him next week to start that conversation about what NIL looks like in the spring, and then into revenue sharing. So, because it's not just about paying players and finding more money to pay players. Yes, that's part of it. But what are we doing as a program to help continue to build that? So it's an ongoing evaluation. It's probably not one or two things I can tell you right now that I can tell you, but yeah, we need some more depth. I can tell you that's probably one thing that we'll be looking at and making sure that the roster's strong, because I don't anticipate a big drop off the league next year. So, but we've got some key pieces that we think we can bring back. And so if you can do that and continue to build this and bring in some new guys, I think we will like what we see. But we certainly have some work to do. But, I've been just really impressed with some of this hard luck we've continued to battle, and we've found ourselves in these games. And which, do we have a talent gap?
All right. So, again, that was what new athletics director Jeremiah Donati had to say the other day on 107.5 The Game. Shout out to those guys over there for doing the great work of interviewing Jeremiah and asking some good questions. So I think my thoughts on basically the synopsis of what he just had to say there was, is there a talent gap? That's the main question that Jeremiah was asking himself when answering it is, does South Carolina have a talent gap? And, how do you go about addressing the issues that you have from a personnel standpoint and just what you're doing on the court? It's easier said than done. It's a problem that South Carolina is going to have to. It's not going to take one day to magically snap your fingers and boom, you get Meech Johnson, Talon Cooper, BJ Mack. You find another year of eligibility for those guys. Gigi Jackson too. You bring all these great players back and everything's solved. Now you're going to have to go back into the portal. You're going to have to find more players and you're going to have to bring them in. And I think with this team next year, we could be seeing a group that looks a lot different. I think number one, you're going to be losing a few guys that are out of eligibility after the season. You got, Jacoby Wright, BBV. You've got potentially Nick Pringle. We'll see what happens with him and the whole JUCO situation. We haven't gotten, not to my knowledge, but Lamont Paris has not been asked about that yet. And obviously, we'll see what happens with that. But that's something to keep an eye on. But as of right now, let's assume he's not coming back next year. There's also Miles Studi, who I hope gets better with the whole blood clot. I hope he's able to make a return this season, but we'll see. But this is his last year of eligibility, and then you've got Jamari Thomas too. So essentially, that's your starting five right there from beginning of the season. That won't be back next year, so you got to replace those guys, and then you also have to replace Colin Murray Boyles too, who is granted a sophomore, but more likely than not going to go to the NBA draft, get picked early on, and go hopefully have a great career. That's probably what's going to end up happening there. So you'll lose your best player, and then we'll see what happens with the rest of the team. Do you maybe lose a few guys that want to transfer elsewhere? Like what happens with Zach Davis? Do you bring him back next year? Because he'll have another year of eligibility. Do you maybe what happens with some of the younger guys who just don't play much? What happens with Cam Scott? I think that's an interesting one to me is that Cam hasn't played a lot this year. He hasn't gotten a lot of minutes. He's been kind of sick lately with the flu and whatnot. But do you have him? I mean, what happens with him? What is the next step in his development? Does he earn a starting role for next season? What does his future look like? Because I see it all the time in the Insiders Forum. I see it on Twitter. You name it. Like, what is up with Cam Scott? Why isn't he playing? Why isn't he doing anything? What's up? I think the simple answer is he's just not ready yet. And it takes time to develop players. Not everyone coming in is going to be Gigi Jackson playing right away, having a good 1 year at South Carolina, and then going pro. It's the same deal with Kyle Murray Boyles. Have a good season last year, have an even better season this year, probably going to turn pro. It's not always one, or I guess in CMB's case, probably two and done. So I think with Cam, might be a little bit longer of a project, a little bit longer than people might like, but I don't know. I think it's going to take a little bit of time there. And then what happens with guys that don't even play this year? What's up? What's going to happen with Austin Hero, a guy that redshirted last year, does not play much at all, honestly. This season, does he end up transferring? I don't know. What about, you could go down the list of the roster here. But the point is, South Carolina is going to have a lot of work to do in terms of recruiting after the season. You'll obviously have your 2024 high school signing class of guys coming in, with Eli Ellis being the star-studded name. Hayden Assemian, also teammates with Eli Ellis at the Overtime Elite League with Moravian Prep. You've also got EJ Walker and Grant Polk. But is it simple as saying those four guys? I mean, this isn't high school basketball anymore. You're not going to be having those guys come in right away. I mean, how often do you find a Fab Five situation where you could play all freshmen right away and make a big run? It's just not. I think college basketball has changed so much where you need to rely on older players too to win. I mean, you could be like Kentucky, with when Calipari was there, bringing in freshmen year after year, and you get the results. But I think that's totally different because we're talking about South Carolina's got good freshmen coming in next year. But I mean, these are with Kentucky and stuff back in the day, it's future NBA All-Star players that are coming in and stuff. So we'll see what happens there. But I think for the most part, you're going to have to really go into the portal. You're going to have to probably invest more NIL capital. Obviously, there will be revenue sharing and stuff coming into the fold. So I'm interested to see what that all looks like. But you have to really dig deep and find the players that best fit your system. Heck, you could have all the money in the world and spend it on what we think is the most talented players in the country. But if they don't fit your system, is it going to work? That's kind of the question, because I was talking about this earlier on 107.5 The Game. When you brought in Talon Cooper, I could be wrong on this, was he the top player in the portal? Probably not. He was at Minnesota and then Morehead State before that. Not everyone knew who Talon Cooper would end up being for South Carolina. Same thing with a guy like BJ Mack, who came from Wofford. Like, you found the guys that, not to say diamonds in the rough, but they were a little bit of like players that maybe not everyone was like honing in on, essentially. You know what I mean? Like with South Carolina, they found the players that best fit their system last season, and you got 26 wins. It worked out really well to where you brought Michi Johnson back. You brought some really important pieces from that first Lamont Paris team back last season, and then you brought in the right pieces that fit your system, and they did very well. A lot of success. This season, though, I think it just hasn't translated over the same. Let's give credit where it's due. South Carolina, Paris, coaching staff, recruiting, they went out and got pieces to replace what they were losing. Jamari Thomas, Nick Pringle, Jordan Butler, Cam Scott. You have guys like that coming in, you feel pretty good about where things are at. I think the excitement for this team going into the season was that, okay, they're going to make the tournament, they're going to get back, this and that, yada, yada, yada. But it just hasn't clicked that same way. Like, we're not seeing, like, I think the players that they brought in, like Jamari and Nick, they've each had their moments. They've each been pretty good for South Carolina, all things considered. But it hasn't led to the same results that you got last year, right? You're 10-11 right now, 0-8 in conference play. Something is clearly up. And I think it's not so much, maybe it is maybe it is players. I don't know. Maybe it's coaching, maybe it's both. But like I said before, the turnovers, the lack of scoring, the constant issues you have generating offense and all these different things are why you are where you are. It's not so much like, oh, these players just stink, like they're just not good. The players are talented. It's just put it all together, and it's not the same beautiful painted picture you had last season. So that's kind of where I'm thinking with that. And obviously, Jeremiah made a good point, and then we'll get to what he had to say about Lamont here in a second. I know we have a question here about that, but I think he made a good point in that it's not all about just paying players and this and that will automatically lead to better results. You also have to figure out, if you're the AD of the program and stuff, and you're like coordinating with the head coach to kind of figure everything out. You have to figure out what works best for this program. How can we, the athletic department, the fans, everyone involved in that watches this program, how can they better help make the product on the court better? I think that starts with, like, you see one example I'm thinking of right now. You see the difference in women's basketball has no problem drawing a sellout crowd every single home game. And they even travel on the road very well too. You see no issue with that, mainly due to the fact that everyone loves a winner. South Carolina's number 2 in the country. They just won the national championship last year. It's easy to sell a program like that. Meanwhile, men's basketball, it's a much tougher sell to put butts in seats. Like, student turnout, it's been great. Like, quite honestly, like it's much easier to get the students out to the game. Number one, because it's built into their tuition, if I'm not mistaken. But also, it's like, hey, it's either that or go to the bars, right? So, why not go watch some college basketball? Another good team probably in town too. See if South Carolina can pull off a stunner. And we've seen that a few times this year. But it's just, there's a lot of empty seats. And it wasn't always like this. It was not like this last year when the team became good. That's not much of a coincidence, because when teams are good, like I said, people will turn out. Everyone loves to just hop on when things are going great. But the moment things go bad, the moment that North Florida loss happened, everything kind of just took a turn. You saw some people check out then, and you're seeing more people check out now. And it's an unfortunate reality, but it's something that, when you win games, like, you will get more people to turn out. But it's not just that. That's not the reason why things are just going south. But it helps in that when you have more people at your games, more revenue, more excitement, more culture, it's easier to sell to recruits. Like, hey, who wouldn't want to play in this environment? Like, again, that all helps. But again, it's also, at the end of the day, money is a factor in all this, and it's the end all be all, in my opinion. You need to, have the money to go get the players that you want. So we'll see what happens. But again, it's going to be a very interesting offseason for South Carolina. And one thing that is for sure, but before we get into that, I want to talk to you guys about our other sponsor, Prize Picks. So Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in all of North America. They're the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections. And then, of course, watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks has quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types. It's what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. I've used Prize Picks plenty of times in the past, still do to this day. I got to tell y'all, it is so exciting and so much more fun watching sports with a little bit of stakes on the line, if you will. So there's college basketball going on right now, NFL Super Bowl coming up in about 2 weeks here. You've also got so many different other sporting events. MLB's right around the corner. You got NBA. The list goes on and on. So just go to prizepicks.com or download the PrizePicks app and use the code GC on screen. That stands for Gamecock Central to receive a guaranteed $50 once you play, $5 in lineups. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about the other part of the Donati men's basketball answer to the 107.5 The Game interview. And Nick Babb brings up the point. I'm not there yet with Paris, but did it sound like hot seat talk from Donati? Well, me personally, no, it did not sound like hot seat talk. And I'll let Jeremiah from the interview with 107.5 The Game kind of explain what he had to say.
This when it was at TCU, there are no easy wins. I mean, every single game, and we're seeing that this year in the SEC, is just a dogfight, and it's really been a tale of 2 seasons for the men's and women's program. We were talking off air about the Clemson game, and just seemingly things were going in a great direction. Had some injuries, and we just have not had any luck since then. But I'll tell you, I think Lamont can really coach, and I think that his brand of basketball, even with some of the injuries, we've seen us, really give some of the best teams in the country everything they can handle, and probably could have, should have won those games. And so that's encouraging if you're a Gamecock fan. I feel like we do have a coach who can coach. He says when it was at TCU, there are no easy wins. I mean, every single.
All right, so that is what Jeremiah Donati had to say about Lamont Paris and his future at South Carolina. It's, again, he's not going anywhere, right? You just think about it. It hasn't even been a full year since he signed that 6-year contract extension after winning SEC Coach of the Year and, capping off a 26-win season. Like, the South Carolina, I remember I was in my hotel in Nashville. It was right before, I want to say it was like right around the time. It was definitely during the SEC tournament, but it might have been after. It might have been before the games really started for South Carolina. So, again, he's not going anywhere. You just paid him a lot. You just signed him to a long contract. I've seen people on Twitter and stuff, and again, it doesn't matter really, but I've seen people start questioning a little bit of Coach Paris and stuff, and some people want him gone. Like, I think it's the craziest thing that you can go from having the season you did last year, and then people want you out the door next season. It's crazy. The moment adversity hits, it's the wildest thing, in my opinion. And I think everyone just, some people, not everyone, but some people forget that, this is a guy that had literally nothing in year one. South Carolina won 11 games in Lamont Paris's first season. And then last year, against all odds, essentially, was picked last to finish in the SEC, won 26 games, went down to the wire. Literally, that Tennessee game was like the second one, that was for basically the SEC regular season championship. And Carolina came up short in that game, but they still had a great year and exceeded all expectations by a wide margin. But again, a 10-11 season, people are starting to question things a little bit. And I think next year, if it continues down this way, where if we're having this conversation next year on GC Live, like, let's go into the future, 2026. If we're talking around this time next year and South Carolina is like 2-10 in SEC play or something, and things aren't looking up, then you have the conversation, I think, of, okay, what do you do here? But again, you're so early into this contract. Lamont is proven to be a great coach at South Carolina. And I think you're seeing just a year where the SEC is really good, and I I don't think the talent is really fully translating over. I don't think it's meshing together, like I said, how it did last season. Everything just went so perfect for Carolina in that 26 win season to where it was always going to be hard to replicate that. But I don't think many people expected the drop off of this year, where you may not even finish 500 overall this season. So again, I think it's a mixture of players, not necessarily. I mean, Lamont's brought this up a few times where they'll ask these guys to do something, and it just doesn't really translate over to the court that well. So that might be one thing, and who knows what goes on behind the scenes with practice and stuff. Obviously, I believe they work on these things. Obviously, they say they do. So obviously, you got to believe them. But it's also like at the end of the day, the execution just always hasn't been there. I don't think, and you're just coming up short in these games where you make a mistake, and really good teams in this conference will make you pay. Your Auburns of the world, your Floridas. I mean, you're losing to really quality teams, if anything. So, again, EXO brings up a good point. How did we manage to beat Clemson? Well, at least we did that. Yeah, and I think the thing is, and it's always puzzled me, because Clemson was like the signature win of your season in non-conference play. Yes, you had lost to Indiana. Yes, you had lost to Xavier. Pretty well at the time, pretty good teams, but Indiana's kind of fallen off a cliff and whatnot. And people are chanting for Mike Woodson to be fired, and Xavier is still a team that obviously is not terrible by any means, but 13-9, struggling a little bit, not as good as maybe we initially thought. But yeah, I mean, look, when South Carolina beat Clemson, that was the win. That was the game. It's like, all right, things are finally clicking into place. I think they're going to get on a roll here. We'll see what happens in conference play. It's going to be tough, but hey, fighter's chance, right? It just feels like ever since then, things have kind of just been a bit off, if you will. Like, let's see. After that game, keep in mind, I think the last time South Carolina played a really, really good basketball game and won was the Clemson game, because the Radford game and the Presbyterian game, you were down at halftime in both those games. And then obviously going from there in the SEC play, the story. They're 0-8 right now. So again, a lot of concerns right now, but I do think LP is the guy for the job. Obviously, he's proven it before to do very well. And here's another good point from EXO, who just continues to deliver good point after good point. It's almost like Shane Beamer year 3. South Carolina was jinxed with injuries in 23 and couldn't get over the hump, and had Rattler and Xavier Leggett. Very good point. It is kind of like that in the sense of you had so many good players in 22, lost a few, and you exceeded expectations in 2022, won 8 games in football, and then obviously in 2023 you went 5-7, and then you're 9-4 this year, and we might be having the same conversation if South Carolina doesn't live up to the expectations for next year, which are going to be much higher. But that's a whole nother topic for another day with football. The point is, it is kind of like that in some ways, where South Carolina's been hurt by injuries. Obviously, Miles Studi's still out. Jamari Thomas was out for a little bit. CMB's been a little banged up with a thumb. I mean, again, injuries aren't the reason why South Carolina can't get over the hump. But maybe in some ways, I believe if you had Jamari Thomas out there for those 4 games he wasn't out there, you probably win, I think, another game or two. But does that really make a huge difference in 0-8 and maybe being 2-6? Not necessarily. But again, a lot of season left to go. 10 games. I think you just got to finish strong here. You got to really, hope that things can at least look a little bit better going into next season. Because again, you have a lot to there's a big checklist probably for next season. Number one, like, got to figure out, how you're going to replace the players that you're losing. Number one, and you got to figure out also how you're going to get this thing right. How are you going to get back to being that tournament team? Because South Carolina was, literally, it's still crazy. Less than a year ago, they're in Pittsburgh for the NCAA tournament. They lose that first round game to Oregon. You're thinking like, all right, this team's going back to the tournament next year. They're getting pieces back. They're getting CMB back. Like, yes, you're losing 3 starters, but again, you are a team that is a hot commodity right now, the place to be. in Columbia, South Carolina, and it just hasn't worked out that way. So we'll see. I mean, again, a little bit to go in this season. See how they finish. Show any life. That remains to be seen. But again, it all starts Saturday night against Texas A&M, 8:30 p.m. tip-off on SEC Network. Gamecock Central will have all live coverage and updates over there as usual. And that reminds me, if you're not already and you're watching right now, give this stream a thumbs up if you're enjoying it. And you can also get, if you missed it, you can also go ahead and listen to this podcast on any of your podcasting platforms that you, wherever you get your podcast from. But also go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Gamecock Central, or Gamecock Central is our YouTube channel. And then if you're not already, go ahead and subscribe to GamecockCentral.com. You can get all the good Insiders Forum coverage, updates, all that good stuff. It's a great time right now to be over on GamecockCentral.com. So that's going to do it for now. Again, this was a nice little stream to talk about basketball and stuff. And we'll have more to talk about on Sunday Reset. That'll be the day after South Carolina plays Texas A&M. Hopefully we're talking about a win. We'll see what happens. But we'll have a lot more baseball discussion tomorrow's Friday. Two weeks away from baseball, starting tomorrow, which is kind of it's starting to sink in a little bit that we're getting close. So we'll have all coverage on Gamecock Central with the scrimmages and whatnot. But on Sunday Reset, the primary focus we'll talk about basketball, of course, but we're going to be talking about the weekend of baseball scrimmages and how everything went down at Founders Park. So, and then next week we'll really start diving a lot more into baseball here on GC Live and getting ready for the season, because before you know it, basketball will be at the tail end of the season for the men at least, and then the women will probably continue to be going on to the tournament and going from there. And we'll see if they can go back to back, and then baseball will be here before you know it. Big Red asks, is that game NCLA? Yes. Forgot to mention that basketball game on Saturday night is at Colonial Life Arena, and and then Carolina goes on the road to face Kentucky the week after. So again, that is going to do it for now. I appreciate all of you guys tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you guys next time on Sunday Reset this Sunday. See you guys then. Bye.